I am from Belo Horizonte, and the following events happened in a neighborhood city. During lunch break at school, one of my friends sat down and said she had found out about a game of spirits and invited us to play it on her house that afternoon. We went to her house in the set time. We got in and started setting up the mood. In total, we were a group of 5, 3 friends that I had brought and the friend whose house we were at. While they lit up the candles, prepared the table and the glass, I watched from across the room. They started making questions, and as usual, the glass started moving and going over each letter, assembling a response. Starting, the questions were silly, about who would get good grades or who would date who. Later on, they started asking when we would die. They asked about me first, but there was no response. They kept asking. One of them said that the spirit was broken. Then, they asked again about when they would die, and this time, the spirit started answering, and he gave dates on the month we were in. They freaked out. One of them got up and threw the glass in the wall. I remember that they burned the ladders and disposed of the candles. We went back to our houses. One of my friends, Eve, was ran over by a drunk guy on her way back home. We got the news at school on the next morning. A week later, another friend that was at the house that day, Rose, fell from her porch while setting clothes to dry. She suffered a head trauma and did not survive through the day. On the Friday from the same week, we were talking at school about what happened, and we were super freaked out with everything. And one of my friends said she was scared of leaving her house, and she said she would go with her family spend some time in her grandparents' farm to get away from this craziness. On Monday, we got news that Mila had drowned on Sunday. From the 5 girls that were at the house that day, 3 were dead. Only me and my other friend that had left the school were still alive. I finished the school year only talking to her by phone, or going to her house. We never met in public places again. She used to say that she felt something weird, as if she was being watched all the time, and that she didn't feel comfortable going out. And that's how she's dead. Her mom hired psychologists to talk to her, but it didn't help. She spent all her time locked at home. She studies, eats, and browses the internet. She lives her life stuck in a house. She calls me very often to ask if I'm okay, and I try to go spend some time with her now and then. Her family is wealthy, and they can afford to take good care of her. As time went by, I was involved in some car accidents, where I got nothing but minor scratches or bruises. I feel like there is something around me. I have shivers that are followed by the sight of something weird like shadows or weird noises that make no sense. Once in my aunt's house, I went to the porch to clean, and I felt a very strong chill. When I looked to my side, there was a dark shadow that slowly vanished, and things like that happen to me very often. We never talked about that day again, but we will never forget. It was a homemade board. We went to a graveyard at midnight, and it had no trees or covers of any kind. This is important. We lit the area with candles and started by playing some stupid games like spin the bottle. Pretty standard edgy teenage stuff. We thought we were so cool. So then we bust out the ouija board, and I'm not taking it too seriously. I was pretty sure my friend Julia was pushing the thingy. She's a prankster like that. But my friend Andrew starts getting really into it. His mother had passed away only like 2 years ago, and he asks, "Is my mother there?" And the pointer goes to yes. I look at Julia with a frown because I thought that was crossing a line. She shakes her head like she didn't do it, and it starts raining out of nowhere. Andrew looks spooked, and he says, "My mother used to love rain." I get a bit snarky at this point and I say, "Well, Mr. Ghost, this is all very moody and aesthetic, but we lit this area with candles. If the candles go out, we have to leave. So if you want us to stay, you're gonna have to cut it out." And it stops raining. Only where we are. There's a perfect ring outside the candles where it starts to pelt down, and inside the ring it's bone dry. I put my hand over the candles and only half my hand gets wet, so it spooks us out really bad and we get out of there. As we get in the car, we're all wet and the windows steam up. As I'm watching out the window, a handprint appears on the glass and smudges down slightly. I screamed and we sped off. Nothing else happened that night, but I can't explain what did, and that freaks me out pretty bad. Years ago, when I was still in school, my mom and sister had gone out of town to my cousin's graduation. I'd elected to stay home and hang out with my dad, and have a guy's weekend in. He bought steaks, we rented movies, chilled out, and talked about wrestling and etc. Everything was going great. Until that night, Dad brought out a Ouija board and told me a story of how he and my mom had used one years ago, before either me or my sister had came along. Two things bothered me about this. The first being that I didn't believe it would work, and him insisting that he did made me think he was just messing with me as a joke. My dad could be a real smartass when he wanted to be, and wasn't above pulling someone's leg for a laugh. The second was back in the day he was a Sunday school teacher, and I grew up a church kid. I didn't understand the logic of him wanting to fool around with something like this, which only led me to believe he was kidding with me. So it's nighttime. There's no lights on but a little over the stove light in the kitchen. We sat at the table and he showed me what to do. After a few minutes of nothing, I got bored and decided to give it up. With a thanks but no thanks, I went into the living room to watch TV. He kept going with it, telling me that it would work. I waved it off and wondered to myself how long he'd keep up the gag. A few minutes passed, and I saw him get up from the table holding the board in both hands and violently smash it on half over his knee. Before I could get up, he smashed it again and shoved the busted pieces into the trash, pulled the bag out and took it outside into the garbage bin. When he came back in, he didn't say a word about what had happened, and I knew better than to try and drag it out of him. I never told my mom or anyone else out of fear it would stir up trouble. He lived another 14-15 years after that, into his 70s, and we never spoke of it again.